This YouTube channel exists now, I guess. And I'm just gonna throw right-wing content in here, and that can mean a huge variety of things. This video is a good example because we're gonna be tackling a video of an old speech by this buffoon known as Neil DeGrasse Tyson. I call him a buffoon, not because he's intellectually inept, but because he just doesn't get it. You'll see what I mean as we get into this. And as a side note, if you're a fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm not even attacking him specifically. I'm just using him as a representative of the academic or intellectual elite in a general sense. And I'm speaking exclusively from a conservative perspective, though this video is mostly just about how out of touch people like Neil are. The title of the video or speech I'm responding to is Hilarious Examples of Scientific Illiteracy in America, featuring Neil deGrasse Tyson, which you can find right here on YouTube and check out for yourself in full. Take a look if you want to laugh. Not with him though, but at him.
You know, there's a vision of tomorrow that pervaded in the 1950s and 60s and a little bit into the 70s. And tomorrow back then looked like this, all right? That was tomorrow.
Tomorrow, as envisioned in the 1950s and 60s, is an anachronistic anime poster. SAO is our dream, guys. Gotta achieve SAO. Just take a look at the city back there. It's like an amusement park or something. These towers might as well be spires, and there's like a moat surrounding the city. Not much functionality here. It's all aesthetics. Personally, I'm a huge fan of aesthetics, but I also realize that scientific literacy doesn't make for more beautiful architecture. Have you looked at anything modern? Just take away all the random metallic coatings on the buildings and the flying saucers, and here you go. I shouldn't have to elaborate any further. Let's just move on.
Yeah, this is just a few years ago. In middle New York City, steam pipe exploded. This looks like a war zone. It does not look like a country that led the world for half a century in science and technology. Steam. Do you think we've did steam? We can't move steam through a pipe. We've been doing it for 100 years. There's a bridge collapsed, Interstate 35 in Minnesota. Like, what country is this? When I was a kid, we used to see film loops of third world countries where their infrastructure was crumbling, and we say, oh, well, we're not that. You know, we're the West. We're developed. You know, we've got engineers. That won't happen here. This is in Los Angeles. Trains collided. You know, we've had trains for 150 years. We haven't figured this out. People died in these disasters. A crane, back in New York City, a crane collapsed. A crane. It breaks into a building, people died. What country is this?
If we just trusted the science, nothing bad would ever happen. We can solve all of life's problems and build the glorious utopia. This is on the level where science might as well be their stand-in for God. This point has been made to death by conservatives, but I don't care. It's a good one. Remember those new atheists with their brain-dead talking points? If God exists, why did he let insert bad thing happen? Well, what Tyson is saying is essentially, if we're using science, then why did insert bad thing happen? This is quite frankly even dumber, because at least God is an agent who has omnipotence. Science is literally just a method of discovering knowledge. They laugh at Christians for believing that the Holy Spirit can guide us in our reading of Scripture, but then turn around and expect the Holy Spirit of science to prevent engineers and laborers from making mistakes. What country is this? Well, it's a country of flawed humans, not a country of your perfect rational robots.
All right, now we got hurricanes. I've told you guys to get cyclones down here. Here's a Hurricane Ike a few years ago, and there's the path. Entered Texas and went up into Canada. And just, so the best we can do is say, run! You know? So if you look at this freeway here, there's a sign that's saying hurricane forming in the Gulf. Like, that's the most useful information you can give these people. I foresee a day, and what does it take? It takes sort of educated, rationalist, engineers, scientist types in your midst to say, oh, here comes a hurricane. Rather than just tell people to run, you say, well, how can I tap the energy of that hurricane? Maybe you can find a way to reach in for that cyclonic energy and have it drive the power needs of the city that the hurricane is about to level. That's a future, I imagine, not a future that seems to be right around the corner. But if I were to draw a future city, it would be a city that's being driven by the storms that would otherwise destroy it.
What do I say to that? It speaks for itself, right? This isn't a joke either, at least it doesn't seem like it. I wish it was. If this was a science fiction novel, and there was a hurricane energy harvesting machine, I would probably still laugh at it for being so ridiculous, even in premise. Let's just ignore how difficult it would be to construct this kind of machine. Ignore how the size of the apparatus would be impossible to sustain. Pretend that the machine could somehow be highly efficient, economically manageable, and convenient. It would still be an utterly stupid idea. First off, how often does a given city experience a hurricane? Let's be as generous as possible. Let's say that happens for 2 weeks every year. So you build a hurricane energy harvester and run it for 2 weeks a year. A hurricane has a lot of energy. It will power the city for longer than that, right? Wrong. The storage of energy is a pertinent issue, which is mostly unresolved. There are certain methods, but to do it at a large scale is immensely costly and inefficient. The hurricane will at best sustain the city while it's around and allow the city to turn off its other power plants for like 2 weeks a year. But of course, the almighty lords of science and reason will somehow make this something we should work towards. If a kid asked you about harvesting the energy of a hurricane, you'd laugh and explain to them why the idea is absurd, obviously. Neil deGrasse Tyson, though, brings up the same idea in a speech about how scientifically illiterate the rest of his country is, and gets a live audience in awe. I don't even think he personally believes in this nonsense. It sounds kind of cool, but it shouldn't. That's the point, it shouldn't. Stop getting psyoped by the Scream people and worshipping the science.
He gurgled up within me and I said, I gotta get it out. So my first tweet from Las Vegas, and if you're not familiar, Las Vegas is, everything, I heard a comedian say this, it's exactly right. Las Vegas is whatever was illegal in your hometown is legal in Las Vegas, okay? That's how to characterize what goes on there. And so here's my first tweet out of Las Vegas. Borders Books at the Vegas airport does not have a science section. Wouldn't want to promote critical thinking before you gamble. So then I got all deep, right? Our human mind, forged and wired for decision making on the Serengeti, is drawn to Vegas and is helpless there. So we invent ways that exploit the fact that the human mind is not naturally critical. And there's one more here. I thought this should have been enough, but I think I kept going. Leaving Vegas today, a city conceived and designed to exploit the failures of logic in the human mind.
He goes on this whole tangent about how gambling is exploitative or whatever. Personally, I don't want to defend casinos, and they obviously do scam some people. But Tyson here fails to recognize the actual point of gambling. In his bubble, he probably believes that scientifically illiterate schmucks think that the casino is a way to make profit. Of course, this isn't actually the primary reason one goes to the casino. Instead, people go there to have fun, be it costly or not. There's a reason Vegas is entertainment and not financial investment. You might as well go up to skydivers and explain how their hobby isn't actually going to make them money in the long run, as if that's why they're doing it.
I just walked into every building and just asked of the elevator, do you have all floors present and accounted for? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14! They're missing a 13th floor. That is true for 80% of the buildings in Manhattan. They're all taller than 12 stories, so 80% of them. Now, I'm happy to report that the Hilton Hotel in this very complex does have a 13th floor, okay? So there is hope. somewhere in the world, not America. Okay? Where's 2 and 3? Yeah, that's a good one. I was so distracted that 13 was there, I missed.
The concept of a floor the elevator doesn't stop at is simply too much to handle. I can't tell exactly how tall the stage he's in right now is, or the ceiling of the venue, whatever he's in. But it's more than a typical story, that's for sure. But of course, it's because the people who built the elevator couldn't count or are scared of numbers or something. That's why, yeah. And as for the whole 13 thing, I don't really have much to say. People just don't want to stay in the 13th floor, so the units there end up not selling as well. It's basically a cultural thing, which it doesn't really matter. Something unique. But of course, we can't have a unique culture. We must let the science, the rationality. We must let the science dictate our lives, the rationality. Oh, the almighty numbers.
So here's what is it, math? Here was a headline. Newspapers' names were held to... Actually, why are we even protecting them? I don't know, but here we go. Ready?
Alright, now we got onto the quotes, which I'm putting in quotes, because I don't have a single source for any of these quotes. Couldn't find them.
I've changed my views 360 degrees on that issue. These are people who are running the country. And then I thought about it and I said, either the member of Congress was mathematically illiterate, we have a word for that, enumerate, or maybe he did know his math and he didn't want to actually say that he didn't change his view. So I don't know which of those is better, that he's being mathematically cleverly deceptive or that he's a mathematical idiot. I don't know which.
The crowd roaring with laughter, of course. He makes up these weirdly contrived explanations as to the meaning of the quote, when it could very easily be explained by using something called basic language comprehension skill. In pure mathematics, a 360-degree angle has the same value as its 0-degree angle. In English, however, they actually have different connotations, even if they arrive at the same place. For example, if I'm with a gymnast and I ask them to do a 360, what would they do? They wouldn't stand still. No, they would do a full spin, because that's precisely what it means to do a 360. So no, Neil, for a congressperson to change their view 360 degrees is not a mistaken way of expressing a 180-degree turn, nor is it a deceptive way of conveying that their views haven't changed. It's a metaphorical way of saying that they've changed their views to the other side, but returned to their original view after further consideration. Anyone who's in touch can figure this out without even thinking, but our demagogues are not in touch, and neither are the people they get along with, or who listen to them.
How about this one? Half the schools in the district are below average. This is a lament, a newspaper lament. That's kind of what an average is. It's about half, It doesn't have to be exactly half, but about half are going to be below average. They probably meant below standards or below grade level, but they didn't. The journalists didn't know the difference, complaining that half are below average.
For this one, without context of the actual article, mostly because it isn't sourced, I can't be quite as polemic about Tyson's interpretation, but nevertheless I can point out just how unwilling he is to give the statement any benefit of the doubt. I'm at least assuming, for the sake of argument, that these supposed quotations exist, even though no one seems to be able to find them from the primary sources. Back onto the topic of the quote itself, though, there are many very simple explanations that he once again cannot seem to think of. The term average is ambiguous in this statement, it's unqualified. Tyson assumes unequivocally that it refers to the district average, but that simply doesn't have to be the case. Average could be referring to a state average, in which case half the schools in the district are doing worse than the average school statewide. In a similar vein, it could be talking about the national average. To be more extreme, it could even be talking about an international average, in which case this would be utterly lamentable, since the newspaper is presumably from America. And of course, he'd rather make up explanations in his head than read the article to find out what they actually meant, because scientific rigor is reading headlines and never going any further. These are the same kinds of people who think it's a problem when I quote from abstracts of papers with paywalls.
This one's a little more subtle. 80% of airplane crash survivors had studied the locations of the exit doors on takeoff. So you read that, you say, I want to be in that 80%. I'm going to study where the exit doors are. In the seat back pocket, where the diagram is. Here's the problem. Suppose 100% of the dead people had studied the locations of the exit doors on takeoff. You would never know because they're dead. So this is a statistic off of one side of the data, and you need the other side of the data to make an informed judgment about how to respond to what it is to stay alive. But people don't know this.
Okay, maybe Neil won't know this, but the people reading the article probably will, and no amount of weird dance will change that. Tyson probably looks at a modern light novel title and complains that it's too short. Yes, we can totally put all the details of the study in the headline of the newspaper. If you care so much about detailed scientific data, would it kill you to read past the headline? But not making a paragraph-long title for your story is deceptive and misleading, of course. Today, this manifests itself in those fact-checkers will tell you something is false because it's missing context, as if it's remotely possible to include whatever arbitrary amount of context they believe is sufficient. Of course, they don't actually care about the context, they just don't like what is being said. Similarly, Tyson doesn't actually care about teaching his listeners about airplane safety. He wants to sound smart while making fun of headlines. As a side note, even from a common sense perspective, obviously knowing where to exit a plane is beneficial, or at least non-harmful. This doesn't need any data. This also gets into another point about just how out of touch he is. What's the total percent of people that study the exits? I'm willing to bet it's well under 80%. I mean, I've never done it. Off that simple intuition alone, the headline now suggests that the exit studiers make up a higher proportion of survivors than total people. Of course, Neil would rather imagine an outlandish scenario where well over 80% of people who board planes study the exits. Neil deGrasse Tyson made plenty of points in this 12-minute video. Very positively received, too. Just looking at the comments, there's almost nothing negative. In all the points he made, I want to say that none of them were good or profound in any way. A couple of the points were okay, including one I didn't touch on because it just wasn't interesting. And the other 6 were either contrived and unjustified grievances or downright insane. And this person is a well-respected intellectual in today's world. It goes to show how the elites just don't get it. I don't know how to make an outro. Subscribe for more, I guess. Leave a like. And tell me what topics you'd like me to tackle in the future. I'm more than happy to continue this series or go on to something else. Doesn't matter. Tell me what you want. I'll probably just make my own videos on whatever I think of as well. That's just the point of this channel. So yeah, take care, guys. God bless.